This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 168. The Insignificance of Gold.
Welcome to the Debunking Economics Podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Now, at one time, it was the thing all money was tied to. Today, gold seems to be the thing that investors rush to in times of uncertainty. Does gold play any part in the way the economy operates, other than being just something else people can invest in and try and keep their money secure? And how good is it at doing that? That's today on the Debunking Economics Podcast. Well, gold, we have been obsessed by it, haven't we? Take the Californian gold rush, for example, when the non-native population of that state rose from 800 in March 1847 to 100,000 by the end of the following year. And it's been around since around 3600 BC. Well, long before that, of course, but that's when the ancient Egyptians started smelting it. And it was the goldsmiths who created money from it, basically, by issuing promissory notes for anybody who'd stored gold with them. And we still use it today as an alternative to currency. It is the ultimate safe haven. When we're unsure about the value of bonds or equities, we buy gold. So why gold? I mean, it's seen as something that maintains its value when times are tough, but only surely, Steve, because we tell ourselves that it retains its value. I mean, so we buy it when the market is down. That pushes the price of gold up, and we basically do that just because we've just told ourselves it's a limited resource. If we buy it when there's nothing, we're worried about buying anything else, we're going to be safe with gold. But surely it's only because we're telling ourselves that's the way it's always been.
Well, this is actually the one of the most amusing videos I've seen on that front is the comedian who's behind the 5-star movement in Italy, and I've forgotten his name straight away. But he was the guy who founded the 5-star. He can't actually run for office because he was involved in a car accident where somebody got killed, and that means he got a manslaughter charge. That means he can't actually run for office in Italy. But he was the person who set up the 5-star movement. And he made well before he became a politician. He had a video talking about the nature of money. And as soon as I heard him talk, I thought, I wish this comedian was a politician, because he actually knew what he was talking about. Because saying money is basically a promise to pay. But he said, what about gold? He said, well, what happens with gold is you dig a hole in the ground, throw away a huge amount of muck, get a tiny amount of gold out of it, and you go put it in a safe, which is another hole in the ground. And he said, so what's going on there? He said, it's just the fact that we believe that it's worth something, which is why we do it. But I mean, there actually is, it's worth discussing the physical reasons why gold has this aura.
Well, it's a limited resource. No, I mean, but
it's not a resource. It's an element.
Yeah,
this is something which took science a long time to work out that it was this, because, of course, we go back to before Newton. If you go back to Newton himself, I see a lot of people criticize Newton because, Newton developed the laws of calculus, but he was also an alchemist. Well, nobody at the time of Newton knew that there were such things as molecules or atoms. They were simply unknown. So you had this heavy thing called lead, another heavy thing called gold. You saw chemical reactions without knowing that's what they were, that could convert. I don't think it was actually done at the time, of course, but take two gases, hydrogen and oxygen, light a flame. Apart from a large explosion, you've also got water. So there was this capacity to convert one thing into another. And why shouldn't somebody as intelligent as Newton think it was possible to find a formula to convert lead into gold before we knew that both lead and gold are elements, not things you can change using chemical reactions? And, of course, the other thing about it is, how do you actually make gold? This is a technical question. How do you make gold?
You don't make it, do you? You can dig it up.
You in the universal sense. How does the universe make gold?
Oh, I wouldn't have a clue. I don't know. Okay. Compression of like any other element, isn't it? I mean, it's
well, in fact, all the elements come from reactions inside. Apart from the Big Bang itself, the elements come from reactions inside suns, and because our sun turns hydrogen into helium. That's where the source of its energy, nuclear fusion. Higher up, and you can start getting through all the breakdowns that occur at high levels of pressure as as stars go through their life cycle, they exhaust the helium, it compresses, you start getting helium formed into carbon, and then another reaction. Higher and higher still, you finally get iron being formed. But that's the last thing that can be actually formed inside a star. To get the heavier elements, and of course there are heavier elements than iron, gold being the one I'm leading up to, they are formed in supernova explosions. So when you get an enormous star, a star like the size of Betelgeuse, which is about 1,000 times the diameter of the sun and 10 times its mass. When that finally explodes, the huge explosion creates everything except gold.
Right. Oh, right. Okay.
Gold is made, astronomers tell us now, by the collision of two neutron stars. Now, neutron stars are things that are so dense. They think that I think it's something of the order of 10 or 20 kilometers across. A neutron star that big has the mass of the Earth.
So, in short, until we have another collision of neutron stars,
we ain't going to get much more gold.
We won't have any more gold. Okay. So it's a finite resource, which is what I was trying to lead to. And that is why we believe that it's going to hold its value. It's seen as inflation proof, and it's why banks, and I don't get this, banks hold reserves in gold. There's 184,000 tons of gold sitting in bank vaults and government reserves. That's where most of it is. There's a small number of wealthy individuals, but most of it is sitting in banks and with governments.
Coming back to the whole idea that gold is dug up from one hole and put into another. Yeah. It's
almost like they don't trust money. Yeah. Banks that don't trust money, they've got to have gold because they don't trust money, and yet they're telling us to trust money because they say they promise to pay the bearer on the money, but they still want the gold. Go figure.
Well, I mean, you come back and the gold has had in terms of apart from being a very attractive metal, and one of the reasons it's attractive, it's the very bottom of the fusion table that you get out of the elements. So it's got the lowest potential energy. It's a very I'm not doing a good job of describing this, but in terms of fusion, that's the end of the line. You can't do anything more in terms of getting energy out of it, and it makes it's absolutely non-reactive. But there are some things it reacts with, but so
it holds its value. It can't be destroyed. Basically,
can't be destroyed, and it can be. You can actually. This is what the Egyptians found. You can hammer it down to the stage where it's virtually an atom thick. So it's able to be it's very malleable. All sort of stuff. It works in jewelry. We're found in technical uses in the 20th century. It's an essential component in circuit boards because of low resistance. So all these things make gold very, very special. But because of this, if you go back in history, you made the comment about goldsmiths becoming the first banks.
Yes.
That's a myth.
Is it? Okay.
Okay.
Because let me back that up and you tell me what's wrong with it then. Because my understanding was that goldsmiths were basically holding the gold for people, and then people coming and asking for their gold, but very often, I mean, they were given a receipt, weren't they? Here's my gold. Okay, well, let me give you a piece of paper. When you want your gold back, just bring that piece of paper back. And then eventually, goldsmiths realised that people weren't coming back that often to ask for the gold, so they could actually issue more bits of paper than they had gold to substantiate it. And
that's something which is feasibly a historical event, but it postdates the invention, the creation of money by several thousand years.
Right.
Because if you look back at the archaeological records of the Sumerian civilization, which two of my good friends are, Cornelia Wunsch, who's the absolute expert on the language, she translates the cuneiforms, and Michael Hudson, the economist, is also an anthropological bent to him.
And the currencies then weren't gold; they were rocks or stones or
no. They were promises to pay, and this is the other thing. It's because money is fundamentally a promise to pay.
So on a tablet or whatever.
On a tablet, When you go, there's actually an Australian researcher called Jane Gleeson who wrote a book called Double Entry, explaining the evolution of accounting. But she makes the point that, again, we're looking at the early records, but the earliest civilization that created was a large-scale civilization was the Sumerian civilization, what we now call Iraq, that part of the world, when it was fertile. And that civilization started off with, we all know of cuneiforms. These are the clay tablets that have got things pressed into which are actually writing. Well, it turns out they were preceded by what the archaeologists first of all thought were kids' toys, because you had a little container like a small pot with a lid on it, and then inside the lid there'd be all these little objects, miniature cows, miniature sheep, miniature goats, etc., etc. It turns out that was actually accounting. It wasn't a kid's toy at all. It was a way of recording what your debts were in a symbolic sense to somebody else.
Sort of like an early form of taxation, wasn't it, really? It's sort of like so money was in effect being issued so that you knew how much you had to pay back to the community.
It was more like a sense of debt with both commercial debts and household debts. There were ways of recording the debts between commercial entities, which were not the ones which are subject to jubilees back in those days, and the debts between households, which were subject to the jubilees. So,
but I think gold became more commonplace because we started to trade more. So what might work?
It's actually what we started to do. We started to fight more. But this is where, in trying to find out where gold actually played a role as a form of money, and by money I mean something which actually enables transactions. So if you look at in like a Sumerian civilization, the transactions were mediated by a form of credit. When you get to the Romans invented coins, maybe in the Greeks before them, but coins became a symbolic representation of the debts between you and the state, and they became the form of commerce. And actually, the Roman coins continued being used long after Rome ceased to be an empire, because they became a unit of account, and people accepted exchanges of them as a means of finalizing transactions. But gold got into the act largely whenever we had enormous scale military conflict, because when you had the fiat money, became money created by kings, by local rulers. That wouldn't be worth a great deal if you go and kill that king. Exactly. So, when you had a stable period in the political realm in the medieval period, certainly post 1066, let's say, take that as our Middle Ages date. Then when commerce would in each of the realms would be driven by fiat coins created by the ruler, recognised and enforced, and all the taxation issues come in there as well. You were taxed in these coins, you had to earn these coins, and so on. And that actually played a large role in establishing some kingdoms too. There's excellent work by Christine Desan, who's a professor of law at Harvard University, into the evolution of successful commercial states particularly in the UK, and she's found that you had certainly between the Romans leaving and then the formation of the feudal states as well. There was a large period where you could see the country falling back to a subsistence level of agriculture and industry. And then I've forgotten which particular king it was, but one of the kings of England, and kings of part of England, not the whole thing, instituted what I think ultimately became tally sticks, and that led to a dramatic expansion in commerce. So rather than taxes taking away from economic activity, this tax and this accounting system actually enabled it to flourish, and you had a growth of the kingdoms then. But gold came into the act when you had things like the 30 Years' War and the 100 Years' War, because why accept the coin of a king who may be dead after the conflict?
Yeah. So gold holds its value. It's trusted, but maybe holds back the economy because there's only a certain amount of it, and you can't issue more gold in the way that you could issue more tally sticks, which is unless you use it as a backing. And that situation I described, where Goldsmith are actually issuing more IOUs than it had gold to support it, because he was assuming, like banks do today, that not everyone's going to rush and ask for gold at the same time. But isn't it interesting that banks still today are still using gold? And I did some numbers to try and work out how much gold there is, what it's worth in the world. Yeah. So gold is set to reach about $2,000 an ounce. That's what they're reckoning. It's not far off that now. There are
1,500 actually, looking at the most recent.
Yeah, but there's talking that it might reach a 2,000 point. So if it was to reach 2,000, there's 350,000 ounces in a ton, and so that by my reckoning, all the gold in the world is worth about $13 trillion, or it would be if it reached 2,000. The size of the world economy is about 80 or 90 trillion. So gold is equal to about 1/6 of the total economy. I'm not sure if that's constant. but I feel like it sort of should be, shouldn't it? If the economy is growing, you'd expect the value of the world economy. You'd expect, and this is some sort of reserve And tell me if it is or isn't. But I mean, the fact that we're using it as a reserve, aren't we? You'd assume then that as the world economy grows, gold should be roughly increasing in value proportionally to it, shouldn't it?
Well, it actually tends to go. I mean, my overall perspective on gold is
over time, it'd be peaks and troughs, but over time.
No, it's not doing too well on that front for the last decade. I mean, gold peaked at 1,750 back in the about 2012, 2013, and it's rising again now, but it's lower now by about $250 an ounce than it was about 8 years ago.
Well, January 1980 apparently was when it reached a peak. It was 850 an ounce, which adjusted for inflation is way higher than
much higher. Yeah, that's right. So it hasn't actually done the what you get out of.
So the question is why then? Because if it's being used as a reserve, surely it should hold its value according to the size of the economy, shouldn't it?
It's being used as a speculative instrument against volatility in fiat currency.
Right.
That's what I see it as being used.
So it's useless then. And why would banks be using a reserve? Why would they be resorting to gold then on something which is being used for speculative purposes?
It's partly because they've got to have a portfolio of assets that they back themselves in. So they have a range of assets they hold, and of course most of that gold is actually held by central banks, I think, rather than by private banks in their own right.
Yeah.
And so there was a period, and they talk about the gold standard. Gold got all this myth, because of a range of circumstantial issues. So gold was used at various times, and particularly the 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War. Gold was a form of commerce within nations because you couldn't trust that the head of the nation state was going to survive the next battle. So mercenaries demanded payment in gold or silver. So that gave them that aura of being used as money, because they were used as money, but only at periods when social trust on a large scale had broken down, and you didn't trust that the king's money anymore, so bang, gold gets into prominence. Then also, of course, if you're trying to settle relations between different countries, then one country is not going to accept the money of another country outside the situation we're in now with the American dollar. So in that situation, international trade was settled by net transfers of gold. And there was a period where countries tried to give some stability to their currency by fixing their value to gold. And then you get also, out of all this stuff, you get the particularly Austrian inclined economists or Austrian fanboys, more is a better way to describe it. They tend to believe, well, money is gold. Gold should be money. And there's this argument, that ultimately everything's going to fall back. We're going to use gold for everything. And I find this bloody annoying because it's mistaking the nature of money. Money is fundamentally a promise to pay. It is not a commodity, nor is it backed by commodities, which is what people think it should be. But gold always comes up as the one that people think is going to ultimately replace fiat currencies, which everybody, and particularly the Austrian crowd, are incredibly critical of. They see ultimately we're going to go back and rely on a commodity basis, and the ultimate, because gold can't degrade, etc.
But also can't increase in supply without some significant cosmic event.
Yeah, that's right.
Then how do economies grow if you've got a fixed supply of money?
Well, this comes back to one of the issues with the period when we did have anything resembling a gold standard, when countries tried to maintain, particularly the United States, tried to maintain the value of its currency relative to the amount of gold in circulation. That is often put across by Austrian economists as a period of, golden age of capitalism. When you take a look at it, the 19th century is the main period in which that was tried, along with various experiments in free banking. So anybody could establish a bank for a while as well, and you had multiple currencies circulating in the States as well. There was a financial crisis every 10 to 15 years. Now, whoopee-doo, if you look at what we've been through in the last 10 years as well. Obviously, there are frequent financial crises in a non-gold standard period. But when you take a look at the long-term data, there were more periods of negative growth in the 19th century than there were in the post-gold standard 20th century. There was far more booms and busts, in other words, under the gold standard than there have been since. So it's put across as a halcyon period, but in fact, you take a look at the data, it wasn't halcyon at all. And there are a couple of periods in the 19th century where a decline in demand the aggregate demand was so great, people were afraid of revolution. And of course, if you look at the classic style, The Wizard of Oz was actually about the gold standard and bimetallism. So there's a mythological.
We learned so much on this program. Why the connection? Just talk me through that.
Oh, unfortunately, you got me.
When you finish drinking your coffee, yeah,
glass of water thing.
Oh, right, okay.
It was I've forgotten the writer of the word. You got me totally exposed here on that one. I've forgotten the author of The Wizard of Oz, but he was a fan. He was actually against the gold standard, and the yellow brick road was a reference to the gold standard. So it was actually it was a tale trying to break the power of the gold standard over silver as a bimetal approach. Was anti the gold standard. So popular
Victor Fleming is the guy's name you were thinking of, I think. So thanks to Dr. Google. But what I don't get from all of this is still, getting back to my point, I can see why gold would hold value to investors. So you are worried about shares falling. You're worried about inflation. You're worried about, you don't want to buy bonds. You don't want to buy shares. So you buy gold because it's seen as being a bit of a safe haven. I can see why, just somebody who's trying to get a mixed portfolio might say, yeah, let's have gold because it's always going to be there. It's going to, in a way, it's not influenced directly by interest rate decisions by central banks, for example. It's not going to lose any value. It might lose a bit of value, but over time, it's not going to be it's a low risk investment. I can understand why people might think that. But I still don't get why banks have to have it. Why is most of this money sitting in reserves in central banks around the world when, for example, if you are the US Fed, you have the US dollar. You will always have, it's not going to suddenly become worthless. Why it is as valuable as gold, surely.
Well, again, central banks used to hold a lot more gold than they hold now. Under the period when we had the idea of when the Bretton Woods Agreement was first put forward, as well as wrongly being based on the American dollar rather than the Bancor as Keynes wanted, the dollar was also set at $35 per ounce. That was the rigid price that was supposed to be maintained, and the impact of that was that because America was running a trade deficit over that period of time, ultimately the number of dollar claims that were accumulated on America by other countries became astronomical, so much so that de Gaulle's, the trade surplus France was running at the time with America, de Gaulle accumulated enough American dollars to be able to threaten that he was going to take them all to, and now I've forgotten the name of what's the Fort Knox? Fort Knox. He's going to go to Fort Knox and demand payment in gold, and the amount of dollars he could have tendered would have actually broken Fort Knox. It didn't have gold to supply it. So that broke the gold standard. We went from $35 an ounce to two levels, so 35 for official and 42 for commercial use.
Well, that gets back to those figures. Gets back to my Bank of America figures, doesn't it? Showing that the amount of gold is roughly 1/6 of the total economy. There isn't enough gold to meet the size of the US economy, I don't think, for example.
No, nothing like it. And so to me, in a funny way, Bitcoin has replaced gold as the object of speculation by people who believe that there has to be something backing fiat money, or they're anti-fiat money in general, and Bitcoin is seen as being non-fiat money. But gold has always been that vision that we're going to have a breakdown of fiat currencies and gold will take over. So if you take a look at the long-term data on gold, you find two absolute bubbles. One, when we went from the breakdown of Bretton Woods, when that was $35 an ounce and 42 and then so on. And then it broke out to that first peak you mentioned back in 1980. In dollar terms now, that's about $700 an ounce. But of course, if you factor in pretty much 40 years of inflation, that's a lot higher price than it is today. Then it went nowhere for something like about, nowhere against nominal terms, but of course rising to some extent in inflation-adjusted terms until 2007. And from that point, it took off like a rocket up to peaking at the highest price it's ever been, which is $1,800 an ounce back in 2011. And then it's gone nowhere since then. Now, I was being annoyed, particularly by one little jerk on my debt deflation blog back in Australia, who was always buy gold, buy gold, buy gold. I'd like to know what he's doing these days. I think he was buying it at $1,750 an ounce, and 10 years later he could sell it for $1,500, which is not exactly a positive return. So I think the mythology,
and that is and people are saying that because, as you say, because they believe that fiat currencies are not going to hold their value, or something's going to go wrong. We're going to see a total crash of the system. So what then? We get we only have 1/6 of the economy left if we're entirely reliant on gold. Again, going by those
the gold price increases by a factor of six, which is why they buy it. So the fundamental cause of that gold price is speculation, and what I find rather than the cost of production. A lot of my friends made money out of that, by the way, between 2000 and 2007, but they haven't made any money since.
But it's a nonsense, isn't it, to expect that fiat currencies globally are going to disappear, that the US dollar is going to become worthless. So gold, what we're saying then, surely, is that gold really doesn't have any intrinsic part to play in the economy. It is just
in the monetary system. No, and I think that's. I think it's slowly dawning on gold bugs. I found many less gold bugs in the last decade than I found in the decade before. Put it that way. And I think what they've gone from being gold bugs to being Bitcoin bugs. So Bitcoin has, because of all the fundamental difficulty that I've always pointed out with gold is that how are you going to do your transactions? Am I going to buy my books from Amazon by sending them a flake of gold? Particularly the price increases by a factor of 6 to replace the disappearance of fiat money. No, you're not going to physically ship it around. You're going to be relying upon certificates anyway. So you're still caught up on the whole thing. You have to trust somebody. Yeah. And the fundamental thing about people who are fans of gold and fans of Bitcoin and in general is that they don't like to have to trust. They'd rather say, here's my physical object, or here's my non-trust-based worth transaction, which is what Bitcoin provides instead. So Bitcoin has taken the place of gold in people's visions of a system which can replace fiat currencies. So
if central banks said, well, look, we've got all this gold which we're holding here, clearly there's no it doesn't have a role in the monetary system. We can get rid of it. Let's sell it off at whatever price it's worth today. Let's let jewelers make nice necklaces. Let's make women and men, if they choose to look more beautiful. We'll just have a lot more jewelry around because gold as a speculative instrument is pretty. It doesn't really change anything materially. I mean, why wouldn't they do that? I mean, what? Nothing would change, would they? If central banks just got rid of all their gold.
Well, they are doing that to some extent. I mean, that's part of what some of the profits of central banks come from. But at the same time, they like private banks have to have a range of assets in their portfolio, and gold, because gold has been regarded as a financial asset for the last several centuries. Then gold is one of the ones they'll buy. But equally, they can decide to sell. If they need to top up their transfers to Treasury, then one way to do that is to sell their gold stocks, because the gold stocks will end up back in a bank anyway at some point. And in that sense, they'll turn up on the reserves of a physical bank, and they may well be regarded as part of the reserves it has with a central bank. So
the other safe havens are currencies, aren't they? Like the yen and the Swiss franc. They're the two major safe havens. To an extent, the US dollar, less so lately. But certainly, when times are tough, we see the value of the yen shoot up, and secondary to that, the Swiss franc. So, and investors like the yen because it's got a strong current account surplus. So why does having a strong current account surplus make the yen such a safe investment?
Largely because you're not going to be forced into devaluation by your needs to buy overseas goods. If you have and this is one reason I differ with MMT on the attitude to the trade surplus. If you're running a trade surplus, you're insulated from dangers of running out of international currency, i.e. the US dollar, to buy foreign goods. Now, if you're running a trade surplus, that's never going to be an issue. So the two types of countries people return to as a safe haven response when there is a financial crisis or worry about different national economies, it's the US dollar because it is the producer of the international exchange currency, and as countries running large trade surpluses like Japan and when you can and Switzerland, where you can buy the currency. Of course, it's not such a good idea to try to buy renminbi.
Right. Okay. So the takeout today is really that gold is just another speculative instrument. It's not really got any role to play in the world of monetary policy. It did in the past, obviously, because it was tied to currencies. But since that's gone, really, it's not that relevant anymore.
Yep, basically.
And don't believe the shysters trying to sell you gold, often in money magazines, isn't it, where you'd hope people would know better, that trying to tell you that gold is the pathway to future fortunes.
Yep, and it hasn't been, for the last 10 years, exactly a growth opportunity. So I think that's one reason I'm seeing less gold bugs around.
Good talk, Steve. Catch you next week.
Bye.
All right, that's gold sorted out. Nothing to see here. And that's it for this week on the Debunking Economics podcast. I'm Phil Dobbie. See you again next week. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.